The marble lobby of Chicago General gleamed under crystal lights, but the real spectacle wasn't the luxury. It was the scandal about to erupt. Claire Whitman, 7 months pregnant, stood trembling in the rain, desperate to tell her husband their baby wasn't moving. But when his eyes met hers, everything changed. The slap echoed like a gunshot. Security dragged her away as he told the cameras, "She's not my wife. She's a stalker." But Claire had a secret even he didn't know. A secret that would expose his billion-dollar fraud and bring his empire crashing down. If you love stories about women who refuse to stay silent, hit that like button. Drop a comment with your thoughts. And subscribe, because this story will leave you speechless. This is how one nurse made a millionaire regret the day he tried to erase her. The fluorescent lights in the hospital parking garage flickered like dying stars. Claire Whitman's swollen feet ached with every step as she shuffled toward her beat-up Honda Civic. 11 hours in the emergency room had left her exhausted, her scrubs stained with coffee and antiseptic, her lower back screaming from carrying 7 months of pregnancy while treating gunshot wounds and cardiac arrests. She fumbled for her keys, the ultrasound photos tucked under her arm threatening to slip. The black and white images showed a perfect profile. A boy, their son. She smiled despite the exhaustion. Then she heard his voice. Garrett's voice echoed from the level above, sharp and angry. Claire froze. He wasn't supposed to be here. He'd texted earlier saying he was in Boston for a pharmaceutical conference. Her heart quickened as she recognized the tone, the cold, businesslike tone he used with people he didn't respect. "No, Mother, I told you, the nurse situation is temporary. Diana's the one I'm marrying. This pregnancy is complicated, but I'll handle it before the merger announcement." Claire's keys clattered to the concrete. The sound echoed like a gunshot through the empty garage. The voice stopped mid-sentence. Footsteps. Quick. Purposeful. Garrett appeared at the top of the ramp, phone still pressed to his ear. When he saw her, his face transformed. Not into the warm smile she'd fallen in love with 3 years ago. Into something harder. Calculating. "I'll call you back," he said into the phone, never breaking eye contact with Claire. He descended the ramp slowly, each step deliberate. Claire's hand instinctively moved to her belly. "How much did you hear?" His voice was flat. "Garrett, what are you talking about? Nurse situation, I'm your wife." Her voice cracked. "We're having a baby." He looked around the garage. Empty. No cameras in this section. She realized later he'd checked for that first. "You're a complication, Claire. And complications get eliminated." The words hit her like physical blows. "What are you saying?" He pulled out his phone, swiped through screens, then turned it toward her. On the display was a marriage certificate. Their names, but something was wrong and the signature read Garrett Mitchell. Not Garrett Hayes. The date was different. The witness names were people she'd never heard of. "What is this?" Claire whispered. "This isn't our certificate. This isn't even your name." "This is the marriage certificate filed with the county," Garrett said calmly. "You married someone who doesn't exist. Legally, you're nobody. That baby," he gestured dismissively at her belly. "Legally mine to claim or deny. Your choice." Claire's knees buckled. She caught herself against her car. "No, no, we have photos. We have a lease together. We have photos of us together." "Sure, a lease. Check the fine print. It's under Mitchell. Bank accounts, same name." "Claire, think about it. Have you ever seen my driver's license, my passport?" She hadn't. 3 years together, and she'd never needed to. "Why?" The word came out broken. "Because you were perfect. Working-class nurse. No family money. Trusting. I needed someone to marry while I sorted out the family trust situation. Someone I could walk away from clean." He smiled then, the same smile that had won her over at a hospital fundraiser. "I'll give you $50,000 cash. Disappear before you show too much. Raise it alone. Or refuse. And I'll make sure you lose your nursing license, your reputation, everything. Who do you think they'll believe, the respected pharmaceutical executive or the obsessed stalker who fabricated a relationship?" Claire's mind raced. Every shared moment, every promise, every "I love you" had been calculated. Strategic. Fake. "You're insane," she breathed. "I'm practical." He stepped closer. She smelled his cologne, the same one she'd bought him last Christmas. Oh, and Claire, you're working tomorrow night, right? I'd be careful. Hospital parking garages are dangerous places. Women in your condition have accidents all the time. The threat was clear, crystal clear. Claire's hands shook as she unlocked her car. She threw herself inside, started the engine, and peeled out. In her rearview mirror, Garrett stood under the flickering light, already back on his phone. She drove 3 blocks before pulling over to vomit on the side of the road. When she finally caught her breath, she looked down at the ultrasound photos scattered across the passenger seat. Her son, their son, except he wasn't theirs. According to every legal document, this baby belonged to a ghost named Garrett Mitchell, and the real Garrett Hayes had just threatened to erase her completely. Claire didn't sleep. She sat at her kitchen table, their kitchen table, surrounded by every document she could find. Wedding photos, lease agreements, bank statements, all of them featured one named Garrett Mitchell. How had she never noticed? Because she'd been in love, because she'd trusted him, because she'd believed the fairy tale of the charming executive who chose a working-class nurse over the society women his family wanted him to marry. She'd been so stupid. At 6 in the morning, she drove to the police station. Officer Davis sat behind the front desk, looking bored until he saw her swollen belly. "Ma'am, are you all right? Do you need medical attention?" "I need to file a report. My husband threatened me, and I think he's committed fraud." Officer Davis grabbed a form. "Let's start with your name." "Claire Whitman. My husband is Garrett Hayes. He's an executive at Hayes Medical Group." Davis paused, pen hovering. "Garrett Hayes, the pharmaceutical guy." "Yes. Last night he told me our marriage isn't legal, that he used a fake name, and he threatened me if I didn't disappear." The officer's expression shifted, not to concern, to skepticism. "Ma'am, do you have proof of these threats?" "He said it in the parking garage. There were no witnesses." "Do you have recording?" "No, I was terrified. I just ran." Davis sighed. "Okay, and you say the marriage isn't legal. Do you have your marriage certificate?" Claire pulled out the photocopy she'd found in their apartment filing cabinet, the one that said Garrett Mitchell. Davis studied it. "So you're saying this isn't your husband's real name?" "Yes, he lied to me. He married me under a false identity." "Do you have proof that Garrett Hayes and Garrett Mitchell are the same person?" Claire blinked. "I have photos of us together. The apartment lease, bank records. Photos prove you dated someone, but without a legal marriage certificate connecting you to Garrett Hayes specifically. This is a civil matter. If he threatened you, we can file a restraining order, but without evidence. He's going to hurt me." Claire's voice rose. The pregnancy hormones, the exhaustion, the terror all crashed together. "He threatened my baby." Davis softened slightly. "Ma'am, I understand you're scared, but without proof of an immediate threat, there's nothing we can do criminally. You'll need to pursue this through civil court. Sue for fraud if you can prove it. That takes money I don't have." "I'm sorry, that's how the system works." Claire left the police station feeling hollow. The system works for people with money. People like Garrett. Her next stop was a free legal aid clinic. She waited 2 hours with her ankles swelling before meeting with a tired-looking public defender named Margaret Foster. Foster reviewed Claire's documents with increasingly worried eyes. "Ms. Whitman, this is complex. To prove intentional fraud, you'd need access to his financial records, proof he used a false identity knowingly, evidence of premeditation. That's extensive discovery, depositions, expert witnesses. We're talking $50,000 minimum in legal fees. 18 months of litigation. I'm a nurse. I don't have that kind of money." Foster's expression was sympathetic but firm. "Then my honest advice, take whatever settlement he offers. It's more than you'll get from a legal battle you can't afford to fight. So he just wins. In civil court, usually the person with more money wins. I'm sorry, that's the reality." Claire walked out into the cold Chicago afternoon, feeling the baby kick. He was active today, completely unaware that his mother was losing every battle to protect him. She had one more idea, a desperate one. Hayes Medical Group headquarters was a glass and steel tower in the Loop. Claire had never been inside. Garrett always said he kept work and home separate. Now she understood why. The lobby was marble and chrome, with the Hayes family crest displayed prominently behind the reception desk. Old money, generations of power. Claire approached security, wearing her nursing scrubs to look legitimate. "I need to see Garrett Hayes. It's urgent." The security guard, a man with a kind face, checked his computer. "Do you have an appointment?" "I'm his wife. Tell him Claire is here." The guard's expression shifted. He picked up his phone, murmured something, then listened. His face grew uncomfortable. "Ma'am, Mr. Hayes says he doesn't know you. If you don't leave immediately, I'll have to call the police for trespassing." "That's impossible. I'm his—" "Ma'am, please." The guard stood. "Don't make this difficult." Through the glass walls of the conference room, she saw him, Garrett, in an expensive suit on, laughing with a blonde woman in Chanel. They were presenting something to a board, completely at ease. The blonde woman turned, noticed Claire, and whispered something to Garrett. He glanced over, made eye contact with Claire, and smiled. Then he leaned over and kissed the blonde woman. Long, slow, deliberate, a performance for Claire's benefit. The blonde woman was Diana Frost. Claire had seen her photo in business magazines. Corporate lawyer, old family friend of the Hayes clan, his real fiancée. Security escorted Claire out. She stood on the sidewalk, 7 months pregnant, in her stained scrubs, invisible to the business people streaming past. That night, she called every friend she had. Half didn't answer. The other half offered sympathy, but no solutions. What could they do? They were nurses, teachers, retail workers. They didn't have money for lawyers either. Claire lay in bed that night, hand on her belly, and realized the terrible truth. Garrett was right. In America, justice costs money, and she had none. Claire went to work the next day because she had no other choice. The bills wouldn't stop just because her life was imploding. She was checking inventory in the supply closet when Dr. Ellis Grant found her. He was 50, gray-haired, and had been her mentor since she'd started at Chicago General 5 years ago. "Claire, you look terrible. What's wrong?" Something in his voice, the genuine concern, broke through her defenses. She told him everything. The parking garage confrontation, the fake marriage, the threats, all of it spilled out while she sat on a box of gauze pads and cried. Dr. Grant listened without interrupting. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. "I've met Garrett Hayes at hospital fundraisers. He sits on our donor board." Grant's jaw tightened. "If what you're saying is true, Claire, this is serious fraud. And I believe you." Those 3 words. I believe you. Claire hadn't realized how desperately she needed to hear them. "Let me talk to hospital administration. We'll get you protection, legal resources. The hospital has an employee assistance program." For the first time in 48 hours, Claire felt hope. The HR meeting happened 2 days later. Claire sat across from Pamela Voss, the hospital's HR director, a sharp woman in her 60s who'd been with Chicago General for 30 years. Dr. Grant sat beside Claire, lending credibility. Claire laid out her evidence, photos, documents, bank statements, everything that proved she'd been in a relationship with someone named Garrett Mitchell, who was actually Garrett Hayes. Voss listened, her face unreadable. "Miss Whitman, these are serious allegations against a major hospital donor, which is exactly why we need to investigate." Grant interjected. "If he's capable of this level of deception—" "Dr. Grant, I appreciate your concern for your colleague, but this is a personal matter between Miss Whitman and Mr. Hayes. The hospital cannot involve itself in employee romantic disputes." "It's not a romantic dispute." Claire's voice rose. "He committed fraud. He's threatened me." Voss pulled a document from her desk drawer. "Ms. Whitman, I need to inform you that Mr. Hayes' attorney contacted us this morning. They've sent a cease and desist letter. If you continue making defamatory statements about him on hospital property or to hospital employees, we will have to terminate your employment for cause." The words hit like ice water. "You're protecting him. We're protecting the hospital from litigation. Mr. Hayes has been a generous donor. His family's foundation funds our pediatric wing. I'm sorry, but unless you can provide concrete evidence of a crime, not a civil dispute, we cannot take action." Dr. Grant stood. "Pamela, this is wrong and you know it. What I know is that we live in a litigious society, and I have to protect this institution. Ms. Whitman, I'm sympathetic to your situation, but my hands are tied. Claire walked out of that office, understanding something fundamental. Institutions protect money, not people. Always. That night, she sat in the apartment she'd thought was hers, looking at eviction papers Garrett's lawyer had served. She had 30 days to vacate. The lease was in Mitchell's name. She had no legal right to be there. Her phone rang. Unknown number. Hello, Claire Whitman. This is Detective Rachel Stone from the Chicago PD Financial Crimes Unit. I treated you in the ER last year after a stabbing incident. You remember me. Claire did. Stone had been stabbed breaking up a domestic violence situation. Tough as nails, with kind eyes. Detective Stone, yes, how can I help you? I heard through channels about your situation with Garrett Hayes. A friend at the station mentioned in your report. I can't officially investigate without my captain's approval, and he won't approve going after someone as connected as Hayes without ironclad evidence. But unofficially, I think you're telling the truth, and I want to help. Claire's breath caught. Why? Because I've seen too many rich men get away with destroying women's lives. Meet me tomorrow. I'll teach you how to build a case that even the system can't ignore. They met at a coffee shop in Ukrainian village, far from anywhere Claire might be recognized. Detective Stone arrived in civilian clothes, carrying a worn leather notebook. Here's the reality, Stone said. Identity theft, marriage fraud. If you can prove premeditation, this becomes federal. But my department won't prioritize it unless we have evidence that's absolutely bulletproof. He's wealthy, connected, and smart. So we need to be smarter. How? Stone pulled out her notebook. We build a timeline. Every interaction, every document, every witness who can place Garrett Mitchell and Garrett Hayes as the same person. We find his digital footprint, bank transfers between his real accounts and the Mitchell identity. We find other victims, because men like this don't stop at one. Other victims. I'd bet money you're not the first woman he's done this to. Maybe not the last either, unless we stop him. But to build that case, you need to do the legwork. Document everything. Record conversations if you can. Illinois is a one-party consent state. If you're a part of the conversation, you can record legally. Won't that take months? Probably. But it's the only way to beat him. You can't fight money with money. You fight it with evidence so overwhelming that even his lawyers can't make it disappear. Over the next 2 weeks, Claire became an investigator. She recorded every threatening text before Garrett could delete them. She photographed their apartment before he could claim she'd never lived there. She interviewed neighbors who knew them as Garrett and Claire Mitchell. Then she found the smoking gun. In a box at the back of their closet, she discovered old mail. Envelopes addressed to Garrett Mitchell at addresses in California and Texas. Forwarded mail. Claire called those addresses and spoke to landlords. 2 other women had lived at those addresses with someone named Garrett Mitchell. 2 other nurses. Both relationships had ended abruptly. Both women had signed NDAs and accepted cash settlements. Claire found them through Nursing Association databases. The first woman, Anna Campbell in San Diego, hung up immediately when Claire mentioned Garrett's name. The second woman, Rachel Montgomery in Austin, listened. How did he do it to you? Rachel asked quietly. False identity, fake marriage, threatened me when I found out. Same, Rachel breathed. I took his money because I was terrified. He said he'd ruin my nursing career if I talked. Made me sign papers saying I'd fabricated everything. Would you testify? I can't. The NDA. NDAs aren't enforceable if they're covering up crimes. Detective Stone told me that. Please, I'm 7 months pregnant. He's trying to take my baby. Silence. Then I'll think about it. It wasn't a yes, but it wasn't a no. Claire was documenting everything on a secure cloud drive Detective Stone had set up when the contractions started. Sharp, sudden, too early. She was only 32 weeks. Dr. Grant found her in the ER break room, bent over in pain. Claire, we need to admit you now. They wheeled her to obstetrics, preterm labor. They managed to stop the contractions with medication. But the message was clear. Stress was threatening her pregnancy. That's when Garrett showed up. He walked into her hospital room like he owned it, which in a way, he did. His family's donations had paid for this wing. Baby, I came as soon as I heard. His voice was loud, carrying into the hallway, playing the concerned husband for the staff. Are you okay? Is our baby okay? Get away from me, Claire said through gritted teeth. He leaned close, voice dropping to a whisper only she could hear. You're in my hospital, Claire. These doctors work for me. Keep pushing, and I'll make sure your medical records show psychiatric instability. Postpartum psychosis is tragic, especially when it starts before birth. They'll take the baby the second he's born, for his own safety. Grant entered. Mr. Hayes, you need to leave. I'm her husband. She's my patient, and she's asked you to leave. Tension crackled. Then Garrett smiled, backed off, raised his hands in mock surrender. Of course, doctor. Whatever's best for Claire's mental health. After he left, Claire grabbed Dr. Grant's arm. He's going to take my baby. The moment I give birth, he'll claim I'm unfit. Not if we document everything, every threat, every interaction. We'll build a medical record that proves you're the stable parent. Aunt Grant kept detailed notes. Every time Garrett showed up, every threatening comment, all documented in Claire's medical chart. It gave Claire a thread of hope. But Garrett was building his own narrative. He visited daily, playing the concerned partner, bringing flowers, speaking worriedly to nurses about Claire's delusions and paranoid behavior. The nursing staff started looking at her differently. Poor thing, their expressions said, pregnancy psychosis is so sad. Claire realized Garrett was executing a long-term plan. When the baby came, he'd have months of documentation showing Claire as unstable and him as the concerned father trying to help. She was being erased. Not violently, systematically, legally. Claire was released from the hospital after 3 days of observation. Bed rest ordered. No work for the remainder of her pregnancy. Short-term disability would cover 60% of her salary, but that wasn't enough. She returned to the apartment to find everything changed. Literally. The locks were different. Her key didn't work. On the door was an eviction notice and a pile of garbage bags. Her garbage bags. Her belongings. The landlord, a nervous man named Thomas Fletcher, appeared from the building manager's office. Miss Whitman, I'm sorry. Mr. Hayes. He's the only name on the lease. He terminated it. Legally. You were never a tenant. But I live here. I've paid rent. Fletcher pulled out receipts. All checks were from his account. I have no record of you paying anything. Because Garrett had insisted on paying rent himself. Being chivalrous. Taking care of his woman. Another piece of the plan. Where am I supposed to go? I'm 7 months pregnant. Fletcher looked genuinely distressed. I'm sorry, I have my orders. If you're not out by tonight, I have to call the police. Claire stood on the sidewalk with 6 garbage bags of belongings, watching her life literally thrown away. She called her mother in Ohio, a conversation she'd been dreading. Marge Whitman answered on the second ring. Claire, it's the middle of the day. Aren't you at work? Mom, I need help. She explained everything. The false marriage, the threats, the eviction. Marge listened without interrupting, which was unusual. When Claire finished, there was a long silence. I told you that man was wrong. Claire, from the first time I met him, I knew. Mom, please, not now. You didn't listen. You thought you knew better. You thought love was enough. I know I was wrong. Can I come home or not? Another pause. The apartment above the diner is empty. You can stay there, but Claire, you're going to have this baby in 3 weeks. No job, no insurance, no plan. What are you going to do? I don't know. The next morning, before leaving Chicago, Claire went to the bank to withdraw money. She needed gas money, moving expenses, something to survive on. The ATM declined her card. Inside the bank, the manager, a woman named Margaret Coleman, pulled up her account. Ms. Whitman, this joint account was flagged for fraudulent activity. Mr. Hayes reported that you gained access through identity theft. Until the investigation concludes, the account is frozen. That's my money. I deposited my paychecks. The account is in his name primarily. He has legal authority to freeze it pending investigation. Claire checked her wallet. $47 cash. That was it. Her entire financial life. Frozen with a phone call. She drove to Ohio with her mother's gas money. Her worldly possessions in garbage bags. Her future crumbling faster than she could process. Then the third catastrophe hit. Her phone rang as she crossed the Indiana border. Pamela Voss from HR. Ms. Whitman, I need to inform you that we've received a restraining order filed by Garrett Hayes. You're not permitted within 500 feet of him. As he sits on our board and frequently works from the hospital, this makes your continued employment problematic. You're firing me. We're placing you on unpaid administrative leave pending the resolution of this legal matter. We're protecting all parties involved. I'm the victim. That's for the courts to decide. I'm sorry, Claire. The call ended. Claire pulled over at a rest stop and broke down. In 72 hours, she'd lost her home, her money, and her job. Everything Garrett had promised would happen. She was homeless, penniless, jobless, and about to give birth to a baby she had no legal claim to. The American dream, she thought bitterly. Work hard, play by the rules, and still lose to whoever can afford better lawyers. Marge Whitman's apartment above her diner in Middleton. Ohio smelled like grease and coffee. It was tiny, drafty, and the bathroom door didn't close properly. But it was shelter. Claire moved in with her 6 garbage bags and her shattered pride. Her mother, to her credit, didn't say I told you so again. Instead, she fed Claire comfort food and let her cry for 3 days straight. On the 4th day, Marge came home from the diner with groceries and found Claire at the kitchen table, surrounded by adoption agency pamphlets. What's this? He's going to take my baby anyway, Claire said hollowly. Maybe if I give him up for adoption to a good family, at least he'll be safe. Loved. Marge sat down heavily. You're considering giving up your son? What choice do I have? I can't fight Garrett. He has unlimited money, lawyers, connections. The moment I give birth, he'll file for custody. He'll use my medical records, my eviction, my job loss. He'll paint me as unstable, and he'll win. So you're giving up. I'm being realistic. Marge grabbed her daughter's hands. Claire Elizabeth Whitman, listen to me. I raised you alone after your father left. You think I had resources? I worked double shifts at this diner. I slept 4 hours a night. I wore the same 3 outfits for 5 years, but I fought for you every single day. This is different. No, it's not. It's harder. Yes, but you are my daughter. Whitman women don't quit when things get hard. We get mean. Claire almost smiled. Get mean. That man is counting on you giving up. He's counting on the system exhausting you. So don't fight fair. Fight dirty. That night, Claire couldn't sleep. She walked behind the diner to where old railroad tracks ran through fields. She sat on the rails, staring at nothing, thinking about how easy it would be to just disappear, to step in front of a train, to end this nightmare. Her phone buzzed. Unknown number. Another text. The photo showed Garrett and Diana at a baby furniture store, laughing, loading a crib into a luxury SUV. The text read, "You should have taken the money. Now you'll lose everything, including the baby. He'll make a great Hayes heir. You'll make a great cautionary tale. Death." Diana Frost had sent it. Garrett's real fiancé, rubbing Claire's face in her impending loss. They were preparing to take her baby. Not someday. Soon. They'd already bought furniture. Claire stared at that text for a long time. Then something inside her snapped. Not broke, snapped into focus. She walked back to the apartment, sat down at her laptop, and opened the files Detective Stone had helped her compile. If she was going to lose, she was going to make him bleed for it. The next morning, Detective Stone called. "Claire, I have someone who wants to talk to you. Investigative journalist named Morgan Reeves. She's been tracking pharmaceutical industry corruption for 5 years. I told her about your situation." Morgan Reeves met Claire at a diner halfway between Chicago and Middleton. She was 40, sharp-eyed, with gray-streaked hair and a reputation for taking down powerful men. "Detective Stone says you have evidence of marriage fraud. I'm interested because Garrett Hayes isn't just some rich guy. His family company, Hayes Medical Group, is about to go public. Initial public offering in 6 weeks. If he's hiding assets through fake marriages, that's securities fraud. The SEC will care about that." Claire pulled out her files. Everything she'd compiled, the fake identity, the other victims, the pattern of behavior. Morgan read through it all, taking notes. "This is good, really good. But we need more, Bahaki. We need proof that he's using these marriages to hide money from his family before the IPO. That makes this not just personal fraud, but financial crimes. How do we prove that we find his money trail and we find more victims? Men like Garrett don't stop at three. If we can find a pattern, we can break this story wide open. Over the next 3 weeks, working from Marge's apartment, Claire and Morgan became a team. They tracked down 5 more women, 5 nurses across the country who'd been romanced by Garrett Mitchell, fake married, then paid off. 3 agreed to talk on record. Morgan also found a financial analyst who'd worked for Hayes Medical Group and been fired for asking too many questions about Garrett's personal accounts. He had evidence of shell corporations, of money being moved around, of Garrett hiding assets. They built the story. Morgan wrote it carefully, checking every fact 3 times. It was explosive. The article published on a Tuesday morning in the Chicago Tribune, Hayes airs secret multiple fake marriages to hide billions before medical company IPO. It went viral instantly, within hours. Hashtag Garrett Hayes Exposed was trending on Twitter. News outlets picked it up. Cable news ran segments. The other victims gave interviews. Claire watched from her mother's apartment as her private nightmare became public vindication. She cried watching Anna Campbell from San Diego tell her story on CNN. "He made me feel crazy," Anna said. "Like I'd imagined everything, but I didn't." And neither did Claire. For one beautiful day, Claire thought she'd won. The truth was out. Garrett was exposed. Justice was coming. Then Garrett's lawyers went to work. 24 hours after Morgan's article published, the counter-narrative launched. First, Anna Campbell and Rachel Montgomery both released statements recanting their stories. They apologized for making false allegations. They admitted they'd been bitter over failed relationships and had conspired with Morgan Reeves for money. Morgan called Claire immediately. They got to them, paid them off, or threatened them. Both. Then Garrett held a press conference. Major networks carried it live. He stood at a podium, looking devastated. Diana Frost by his side, holding his hand supportively. "I'm heartbroken," he said, voice trembling with what looked like genuine emotion. "Ms. Whitman and I had a brief relationship 2 years ago. When it ended, she became obsessive. I have restraining orders, cease and desist letters, documentation of harassment. Now she's dragged my name through the mud with fabricated evidence and paid actresses." He played a video, security footage from his office building showing Claire trying to get past security, looking disheveled and manic. "I feel terrible for Ms. Whitman. She clearly needs psychiatric help. Pregnancy can cause severe mental health issues. I hope she gets the treatment she needs. And I hope this doesn't affect her child's future. That innocent baby deserves better." The performance was flawless. By the end, he looked like the victim. Within hours, the narrative flipped. Twitter lit up with lying Claire memes. Think pieces appeared about false accusation culture. Medical experts were interviewed about pregnancy-induced psychosis. Morgan's editor at the Tribune published a retraction. "Upon further investigation, we cannot verify the central claims of this story." The medical board opened an investigation into Claire's nursing license for unprofessional conduct and false statements, and the Chicago police issued a warrant for Claire's arrest for filing a false police report. Detective Stone called, frantic. "Claire, turn yourself in. Don't run. We can still fight this." How he destroyed everything. "Trust me, please." 2 police officers arrived at Marge's diner that evening. Officer Brennan and Officer Davis. They were professional but firm. "Claire Whitman, you're under arrest for filing a false police report and harassment. You have the right to remain silent." The handcuffs closed around her wrists as news cameras filmed through the diner windows. Marge screamed at the officers. Claire, 9 months pregnant now, was walked to a police car in full view of the media. The footage went viral. Pregnant woman arrested for false accusations. The internet's favorite kind of villain. In lockup, Claire sat in a holding cell, her belly enormous, her spirit broken. She tried to fight the system. The system had crushed her. A guard appeared. "Whitman, you're going to county medical. You're in labor." The contractions had started, probably from stress. Claire was transported in handcuffs to the hospital, under guard. The ultimate humiliation captured by media cameras the entire way. At county medical, They took the cuffs off long enough to get her into a gown. Then they restrained one wrist to the bed rail. Policy for prisoners in labor. Dr. Grant appeared, having driven from Chicago the moment he heard. This is barbaric. I'm her doctor. She's in custody. Sir, we have protocols. The contractions intensified. Claire barely registered the faces around her. Nurses, doctors, all strangers. Dr. Grant held her free hand. Then Garrett arrived with Diana and a legal team. We have an emergency custody order, his lawyer announced. The moment that baby is born, he becomes a ward of Mr. Hayes pending paternity confirmation and psychiatric evaluation of the mother. Over my dead body, Dr. Grant said. Doctor, you can lose your license interfering with a legal custody order. Then I lose it. The standoff continued until Claire's water broke. Then medicine took over. Personal drama meant nothing to biology. Claire pushed for 2 hours, exhausted, terrified, defeated. When her son finally emerged, screaming in pink, they placed him on her chest for exactly 90 seconds. He's perfect, she whispered, memorizing his face. I'm so sorry. Mommy tried. Garrett's lawyer stepped forward to take the baby. Then the door burst open. Detective Rachel Stone strode into the delivery room, followed by 3 FBI agents in windbreakers. Nobody move. Garrett Hayes, you're under arrest for identity theft, wire fraud, marriage fraud, conspiracy to commit securities fraud, and about 15 other charges were still tallying up. Garrett's face went white. What? This is insane, my lawyers are being arrested too, said the lead FBI agent, a woman named Sarah Bennett. Turns out when we really dug in, we found everything. And I mean everything. Claire, still holding her newborn, looked at Detective Stone in confusion. What's happening? Stone smiled. We set a trap, and he walked right into it. Over the next 20 minutes, as doctors finished with Claire and nurses checked her baby, Stone explained, when Claire had been arrested, it hadn't been a failure. It had been strategy. We needed legal cause to subpoena Garrett's entire digital footprint, Stone said. Once you were officially a victim of harassment, according to his claims, we could access everything. His computers, his phones, his financial records. All of it became fair game in the investigation of the crime he claimed you committed. But I thought you believed me. I did, but we needed his lawyers to demand a full investigation to clear his name. So they did. They handed us the keys to his entire life. What the FBI found was staggering. Garrett hadn't married 3 women, or 5. He'd married 7 nurses across the country, all under variations of false identities. He used their information to create shell corporations, hide assets, evade taxes. When Hayes Medical Group had discovered the fraud during pre-IPO audits, instead of turning him in, they tried to cover it up. His family's company was complicit. Diana Frost hadn't just known about it. She'd helped orchestrate it. As a corporate lawyer, she'd set up the shell companies. She was being arrested too. But why did this work now when everything else failed? Claire asked. Agent Bennett pulled up a chair. Because we found something you didn't know about. One of Garrett's marriages was actually real, legally filed, properly documented, under his real name. She handed Claire a document, a marriage certificate dated 3 years ago. Garrett Michael Hayes married to Claire Elizabeth Whitman. That's impossible, Claire whispered. This isn't the certificate I have. Because he gave you a fake to make you think you weren't married. But he needed one real marriage to maintain his inheritance status with the family trust. You were it. He married you legally, then made you believe it wasn't real so he could control you. Claire stared at the document. So I'm actually his wife? Yes, which means you're entitled to half of everything he owns in a divorce, including his share of Hayes Medical Group, which is currently valued at about $400 million. The room went silent except for the baby's soft breathing. I'm worth $200 million, plus damages for fraud, emotional distress, and about a dozen other torts our lawyers are working up. Congratulations, Mrs. Hayes. You're very, very rich. Claire looked down at her son, who was staring up at her with unfocused newborn eyes. Did you hear that? Baby mommy's not crazy. And you're safe. You're safe. She started crying then. Not from sadness, from relief so profound It felt like her chest might crack open. Garrett was let out in handcuffs, still protesting his innocence. Diana followed, silent and pale. Their lawyers were arrested separately at their offices downtown. The news broke within the hour. Every channel ran it. The man who'd accused his wife of lying was actually a serial fraudster facing federal charges. The pregnant nurse he'd tried to destroy was actually an heiress to a pharmaceutical fortune. The internet, so quick to condemn Claire, reversed course just as fast. Hashtag justice for Claire trended. Think pieces about believing women appeared everywhere. Cable news hosts who'd called her a liar issued awkward retractions. Claire barely noticed. She was focused on her son, who she named Henry, after her grandfather, Henry Whitman Hayes. She kept both names. He was her son, but he was also entitled to the Hayes fortune. She'd make sure he got it. The next morning, still in the hospital, Claire had visitors. Morgan Reeves, Dr. Grant, her mother Marge, and Detective Stone, all crowded into her room. "So what happens now?" Claire asked. "Now you get the best lawyers money can buy," Morgan said, "and you take them for everything. The company too, especially the company. They tried to cover up Garrett's crimes to protect their IP. That makes them liable. You could own Hayes Medical Group outright if you want." Claire looked at Henry, sleeping in her arms. "I want it, not for revenge, for protection. I want my son to grow up knowing his mother made sure no one could ever hurt them again." Over the next 6 months, the legal process played out. Garrett pleaded guilty to avoid trial and got 15 years in federal prison. Diana got 7 years. The Hayes family tried to fight the divorce settlement, but eventually caved when more evidence of their cover-up emerged. Claire walked away with $200 million, controlling interest in Hayes Medical Group, in full custody of Henry. The family tried to claim grandparents' rights. Her lawyers crushed them. She also got something more valuable: vindication. Every news outlet that had called her a liar ran corrections. Every think piece that had questioned her sanity issued apologies. It didn't undo the trauma, but it helped. With her settlement money, Claire did something unexpected. She bought Chicago General Hospital. The press conference happened 6 months after Henry's birth. Claire stood in front of Chicago General Hospital, her son in her arms, a new sign being unveiled behind her. The sign read Whitman Medical Center. Reporters shouted questions. Claire raised her free hand for quiet. "6 months ago, I was arrested in this hospital while in labor. I was handcuffed to a bed. My baby was going to be taken from me. And every institution that should have protected me instead protected my abuser. Today, I'm announcing that I've purchased Chicago General Hospital. I'm renaming it Whitman Medical Center, and I'm making some changes." She outlined her plan: new policies protecting patients from being discharged without resources, a legal aid office inside the hospital for victims of domestic violence, mandatory training for staff on recognizing financial abuse, free childcare for single mothers receiving treatment. "I want every nurse who walks through these doors to know that the system that failed to protect you, you now own it. The institution that chose money over morality, it answers to you now." A reporter called out, "What about Garrett Hayes? He's serving 15 years in federal prison. His family disowned him. His company collapsed. But honestly, I don't think about him anymore. I think about making sure there's no woman after me. That ends now." The press conference went viral. Not for the scandal this time, for the redemption. Claire threw herself into running the hospital. She worked part-time as a nurse still, refusing to give up the career she loved. But she also sat on the board, made policy decisions, and used her fortune to actually change things. Dr. Grant became her chief of staff. Detective Stone joined the hospital's security team, creating protocols to identify patients in abusive situations. Morgan Reeves wrote a book about the case, Erased How One Nurse Fought Back Against a Billionaire. It became a bestseller. Claire got a percentage of the profits, which she donated to organizations helping women leave abusive relationships. Marge moved to Chicago, helping with Henry and running the hospital cafeteria with the same no-nonsense efficiency she'd run her diner. Claire's life found a rhythm. She woke up at 6, fed Henry, worked at the hospital until 3, then came home to be a mom. She dated occasionally but wasn't in a hurry. She'd learned the hard way that some things matter more than romance. Henry grew into a happy toddler, completely unaware of the drama that had surrounded his birth. Claire planned to tell him someday, but for now, he just knew Mommy worked at a hospital and people were really nice to them everywhere they went. The civil lawsuits continued. Claire sued Hayes Medical Group, which eventually settled for an additional $50 million. She used that money to establish the Whitman Foundation, providing legal services to women fighting fraudulent marriages and identity theft. She also established a scholarship fund for nursing students from working-class backgrounds. Every recipient got full tuition plus living expenses. No more choosing between education and survival. A year after Henry's birth, Rachel Montgomery from Texas reached out. She'd broken her NDA after Garrett's conviction and wanted to meet Claire in person. They met at a coffee shop in Chicago. Rachel was nervous, apologetic. "I'm sorry I didn't help sooner. I was scared." "I understand," Claire said. "I was scared too. When you called me that first time, asking for help, I almost said yes. Then I got scared of what he'd do. But I watched what happened to you. How you kept fighting even when everything was stacked against you. You're braver than I'll ever be." "I'm not brave, I just didn't have a choice." "That's what brave is. Doing it anyway when you don't have a choice." They became friends after that. Rachel moved to Chicago and started working at Whitman Medical Center. Two of the other victims Garrett had married did too. They formed an unofficial support group, meeting monthly to process their shared trauma. Claire learned something important through those meetings. She wasn't special. What happened to her happened to countless women every day. The only difference was she'd had enough resources, eventually, to fight back. Most didn't. So she used her platform to change that. She spoke at conferences, gave interviews, lobbied for changes to marriage fraud laws. She made politicians uncomfortable by asking why identity theft was a crime, but marrying someone under a false identity had no clear legal consequences. Laws started changing. Illinois passed the Claire Whitman Act, making marriage fraud a specific criminal offense with mandatory minimum sentences. Other states followed. But the work that mattered most to Claire happened in her hospital. She created a system where women could flag their medical records if they feared a partner might use their health information against them. She hired social workers specifically trained in financial abuse. She made sure every patient leaving the hospital had resources, not just prescriptions. One afternoon, 2 years after Henry's birth, Claire was doing rounds when a young nurse approached her timidly. "Ms. Whitman, I'm sorry to bother you, but I heard your story, and I think something similar is happening to me." Claire led her to a private conference room. "Tell me everything." The nurse, whose name was Emily, explained. Her husband had started isolating her, controlling her money and questioning her sanity. She'd found documents suggesting their marriage license had irregularities. Claire listened, taking notes, her heart aching. "Emily, I'm going to connect you with resources. Lawyers, investigators, a safe place to stay if you need it. But I need you to understand something. This is going to be hard. The system isn't built to help us. It's built to protect people with money and power. You're going to have to fight. I don't know if I can." Claire leaned forward. 2 years ago, I was 7 months pregnant, homeless, and being arrested on false charges. I didn't think I could fight either. But I did. You know why? Why? Because I didn't have a choice, and neither do you. You can let him erase you, or you can fight back. It's going to hurt either way. Might as well hurt while you're fighting. Emily's eyes filled with tears. "Will you help me?" "Yes, but Emily, I can't fight for you. I can give you tools, resources, support, but you have to be the one to use them. Nobody saved me. I had to save myself. You will too." Emily nodded slowly. "Okay, tell me what to do." And Claire did. She walked Emily through the same steps she'd taken. Document everything. Record conversations. Build evidence. Find allies. Fight strategically, not emotionally. 6 months later, Emily left her husband with a restraining order, proof of his financial abuse, and full custody of her daughter. She credited Claire with saving her life. But Claire knew better. Emily had saved herself. Claire had just shown her it was possible. 3 years after Henry's birth, Claire received a letter, prison mail from Garrett Hayes. She almost threw it away unread. But curiosity won. The letter was handwritten. Garrett's familiar script somehow smaller, less confident. "Claire, I know you owe me nothing, not forgiveness, not even acknowledgement, but I've had time to think. 3 years of nothing but time. What I did to you was monstrous. I knew it even while I was doing it. I told myself it was business, that you'd be fine, that everyone plays the game. But I was lying to myself. I destroyed you for convenience. I destroyed 7 women the same way. I don't expect you to care, but I've spent every day in here trying to understand how I became that person. The answer is I always was that person. Money and power just let me act on it. For what it's worth, I see that now. I see what I am. I hope Henry never knows me. I hope he grows up to be nothing like me. Tell him I'm sorry. Tell him his father was a coward. Maybe he'll learn from that. G.H. Claire read the letter 3 times. She felt nothing. Not anger, not satisfaction, not even pity. Just emptiness where Garrett used to live in her mind. She wrote back a single sentence. I don't forgive you, but I don't think about you anymore. That's better. She sent it and never heard from him again. Later that year, Diana Frost was released from prison after serving 3 years. She'd cooperated with prosecutors, which reduced her sentence. She reached out to Claire through her lawyer, asking to meet. Claire agreed, curious. They met at a neutral location, a park bench overlooking Lake Michigan. Diana looked different. No designer clothes, no corporate polish, just a woman in jeans and a sweater, looking older than her years. Thank you for meeting me, Diana said. I wasn't sure you would. I almost didn't. I wanted to apologize. Not that it matters, not that it changes anything, but I was part of what happened to you. I helped Garrett set up those shell companies. I knew about the fake marriages. I told myself it was just business, legal gray areas. I didn't think about the real women being hurt. Why are you telling me this? Because I spent 3 years in prison with women who'd been abused by men like Garrett, men I'd helped stay out of trouble, and I realized I wasn't just complicit. I was an abuser too. I enabled it. I profited from it. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I just wanted you to know I understand what I did. Claire studied her. What are you going to do now? I don't know. My law license is gone. My family won't talk to me. I'm working at a coffee shop trying to figure out who I am without the career and the money. Good. Figure it out. Then use whatever you learn to help someone else. That's the only apology that matters. Diana nodded. That's fair. They didn't become friends, but Diana did eventually work for Claire's foundation, using her legal knowledge to help draft stronger domestic violence protections. She never made much money. She never got her old life back. But she helped a lot of women navigate the system that had failed them. Claire learned something from that conversation: people could change, but only if they lost everything first. Garrett hadn't changed because even in prison, he still thought of himself as the victim. Diana changed because she'd truly lost her identity and had to build a new one. Around that same time, Claire received an invitation to speak at a nursing conference. The keynote address. Topic: Surviving when the system fails you. She almost declined. Public speaking terrified her. But then she thought about all the women who'd reached out over the years, sharing their own stories of abuse and erasure. They needed to hear from someone who'd survived. She accepted. The ballroom held 5,000 nurses from across the country. Claire stood at the podium, Henry backstage with Marge, and looked at the sea of faces. 3 years ago, I was arrested while in labor. My husband had convinced the world I was crazy. He'd falsified our marriage, stolen my money, and threatened to take my baby. Every system that should have protected me failed. The police couldn't help without evidence I couldn't afford to gather. The courts were too expensive. My employer protected the donor over the nurse. I was erased systematically, legally, efficiently. The room was silent. I'm not going to stand here and tell you it all worked out because I stayed positive, or because I prayed, or because I believed in justice. It worked out because I got lucky. A detective believed me. A journalist needed a story. The FBI found evidence while investigating something else. Without those lucky breaks, I'd be exactly where Garrett wanted me, erased, broke, and separated from my child. Murmurs rippled through the audience. That's the truth nobody wants to say out loud. Sometimes victims don't win. Sometimes the system works exactly as designed, to protect people with power. Sometimes justice doesn't come. So when I talk to women in similar situations now, I don't tell them to have faith in the system. I tell them to document everything, to record conversations, to build evidence even when it feels futile, to find people who believe them and hold on to those people like lifelines, and to be prepared for the long fight, because it will be long. She paused, gathering her thoughts. But here's what else I tell them. The system may be broken, but you're not. You're not crazy. You're not too sensitive. You're not imagining it. When someone is erasing your reality, trust yourself above everyone else. And when people ask why you didn't leave sooner or fight harder, remember you fought as hard as you could with the resources you had. That's all anyone can do. The applause started slowly, then built to a standing ovation. Claire looked out at 5,000 nurses, many crying, many nodding, many holding each other. After the speech, hundreds of women waited to talk to her, share their stories, ask for advice. Claire stayed for 4 hours, talking to each one, handing out cards for her foundation, connecting them with resources. One woman, older, maybe 60, grabbed Claire's hand. Thank you for saying it's okay that we don't always win. Everyone wants us to be inspirational. Sometimes I just needed someone to say it's okay that I'm still scared, that I still have nightmares, that I didn't bounce back. It is okay, Claire said. Trauma doesn't have a timeline. Healing isn't linear. You survived. That's enough. The woman cried. Claire held her hand until she was ready to let go. That night, back at her hotel, Claire called her mother. How'd it go? Marge asked. Hard, good, important. You sound tired. I am. But Mom, I think I finally understand something. What happened to me isn't just my story. It's happening to thousands of women right now. And if I have the platform to help them, I have to use it, even when it's exhausting. Just don't forget to take care of yourself too, baby. You can't help anyone if you burn out. I know. I'm learning to balance it. After they hung up, Claire went to check on Henry, who was asleep in the adjoining room with Marge. She watched him breathe, his small chest rising and falling, his face peaceful. You're the reason I kept fighting, she whispered. And now I keep fighting for all the other kids who need their moms protected. I hope that makes sense when you're older. Henry stirred but didn't wake. Claire kissed his forehead and returned to her room. She had emails to answer, women asking for help, journalists wanting interviews, politicians asking her to testify about domestic violence legislation. The work never stopped. But neither did she. 5 years after Henry's birth, Claire stood in front of a different audience, the Senate Judiciary Committee, hearing testimony on the proposed Federal Marriage Fraud Act. Senator Margaret Foster, the chair, introduced her. Our next witness is Claire Whitman, founder of the Whitman Foundation and survivor of one of the most publicized marriage fraud cases in recent history. Ms. Whitman, please proceed. Claire adjusted the microphone, her testimony prepared but her hands still shaking slightly. Senators, thank you for the opportunity to speak today. 5 years ago, I married a man who I thought loved me. I was wrong. He'd stolen a dead man's identity, created an entire false life, and married me to hide assets from his family. When I discovered the truth, he systematically erased me. He turned my employer against me, froze my bank accounts, evicted me while I was 7 months pregnant, and had me arrested on false charges while I was in labor. Several senators looked uncomfortable. Good. I was lucky. I had resources. Eventually, most women don't. Since founding my organization, I've worked with over 3,000 women who've experienced similar fraud. Do you know what they all have in common? They were systematically failed by every institution designed to protect them. Police couldn't help without evidence. Courts were too expensive. Employers sided with wealthy abusers. And the law had no clear category for what was happening to them. She pulled out a folder of statistics. Marriage fraud costs American women an estimated $2 billion annually in stolen assets, legal fees, and lost opportunities. But it's not currently a federal crime unless it involves immigration fraud. A man can marry you under a false identity, steal your money, threaten your children, and face no federal consequences. That needs to change. For the next hour, Claire answered questions from senators. Some were sympathetic, some were skeptical. One senator suggested women should do more due diligence before marriage. Claire's response was sharp. Senator, should I have hired a private investigator before accepting a marriage proposal? Should every woman Google her partner's social security number? Or should we have laws that make it illegal to marry someone using a stolen identity? Because right now, we don't. The clip went viral. Within 24 hours, hashtag due diligence senator was trending. The senator issued an apology. The bill gained momentum. 3 months later, the Federal Marriage Fraud Act passed. It made marriage under false identity a federal crime, carrying mandatory minimums and no statute of limitations. It also provided federal funding for organizations helping victims. Claire watched the vote from the Senate gallery, holding Henry's hand. He was 5 now, old enough to understand that mommy was doing important work. Did they help people, he asked. Yes, baby, they helped a lot of people. Because of you. Because of a lot of people working together, I just told them my story. That night, Claire celebrated with her team. Detective Stone, Morgan Reeves, Dr. Grant, her mother, the lawyers who'd fought her case. They gathered at Whitman Medical Center in the conference room where Claire had first outlined her plan to buy the hospital. To changing the world one law at a time, Morgan toasted. They drank sparkling cider, Henry included with his own special glass. He felt very important. Later, after everyone left, Claire walked the halls of her hospital. Night shift nurses nodded respectfully. Patients slept peacefully. The building hummed with the quiet efficiency of good medicine. She stopped in front of a wall display, photos of the hospital's history. At the end was a new photo Claire on the day she'd bought the building, holding infant Henry, determination in her eyes. The plaque read Claire Whitman, RN, owner and CEO, survivor and advocate. When the system fails, we rebuild it. Her phone buzzed. Email from Emily, the young nurse she'd helped 2 years ago. Subject, you need to see this. The email contained a link to a YouTube video. A young woman, maybe 25, speaking directly to camera. My name is Jessica. 3 months ago, I discovered my husband had married me under a false identity. He was stealing from me, gaslighting me, threatening to take my daughter. I felt completely alone. Then I found Claire Whitman's foundation. They gave me free legal help, connected me with a detective who believed me, and helped me gather evidence. Last week, my husband was arrested. I got my daughter back. I got my life back. I'm making this video because I want other women to know you're not crazy, you're not alone, and there are people who will fight for you. Thank you, Claire. You saved my life. The video had 2 million views and climbing. Comments filled with other women sharing their stories, thanking Claire, starting the hashtag she saved herself. Claire watched the video 3 times, crying by the end. This was why she kept fighting. Not for herself anymore. For Jessica, for Emily, for the thousands of women who just needed someone to believe them. She texted Emily back, "This is everything. Thank you for sharing." Then she went home to her small house in Lincoln Park. Henry was asleep. Marge reading in the living room. "Everything okay?" Marge asked. "Yeah, Mom. Everything's good." Claire checked on Henry one more time, kissed his forehead, then went to her own room. She kept a journal now, something her therapist recommended. Processing trauma was ongoing work. She wrote, 5 years ago, I thought my life was over. I was wrong. My old life ended, but a new one began, a better one, a harder one, but one that matters. I'm not the same person I was. That woman was too trusting, too willing to let others define her reality. This version of me knows her worth, knows her power, knows that sometimes the only person who can save you is yourself. I wish I could go back and tell that terrified, pregnant woman in the parking garage that she was going to survive this, that she was going to win, that her son would be safe and loved, that she'd help thousands of other women. But I couldn't tell her. She had to live through it to become me. And that's okay. The pain mattered. It taught me what I needed to know. Tonight, I'm grateful. Not for what happened, but for who I became in spite of it. She closed the journal and turned off the light. Somewhere in a federal prison, Garrett Hayes probably couldn't sleep either, haunted by different demons. Diana Frost was rebuilding a humble life, trying to make amends. The other victims were scattered across the country, healing at their own pace, but Claire was building something that would outlast all of them. A foundation, a hospital, a legacy of women helping women, laws that protected the vulnerable, a model other cities were copying. She'd been erased once, but she'd rewritten herself in permanent ink. The next morning, Claire woke to Henry jumping on her bed. Mommy, Grandma made pancakes. She laughed, pulling him into a hug. Then we better not keep her waiting. At breakfast, Marge asked about her schedule. Hospital rounds this morning, foundation board meeting at 2, interview with PBS at 4 about the new law, and dinner. Home by 6. I promised Henry we'd make pizza. Can I put on the cheese? Henry asked excitedly. All the cheese you want, buddy. This was her life now. Medicine and advocacy, motherhood and mission. It wasn't perfect. Some days were still hard. Anniversaries of trauma hit unexpectedly. But it was hers, earned, built, protected. As Claire drove to work, passing the Chicago skyline glittering in morning sun, she thought about all the women who'd come before her, the ones who didn't have resources, the ones who didn't get lucky breaks, the ones who'd been erased completely. She carried their names in her heart. She fought for them too, because the truth that Claire had learned, the truth she now taught other women was this: the system is designed to protect power. It always has been. But systems are run by people, and people can be changed, pressured, forced to evolve, one law at a time, one policy at a time, one woman helped at a time. You don't beat the system by believing in it. You beat it by refusing to be erased, by documenting everything, by building evidence, by finding allies, by fighting strategically, by using every resource available and creating new ones when necessary. And most importantly, by refusing to let anyone define your reality but you. Claire Whitman had been many things: wife, nurse, victim, survivor, advocate, mother, CEO. But the title she was proudest of was the one Henry would grow up understanding. She was a woman who'd been erased and had erased back.